that we are having around the topic on women, migrant women, and COVID. And I think it's a really unique occasion that we are having today to really talk about this topic on migration, migrant women from our own realities and migrant women. Buenas tardes a todas. Les estoy dando una bienvenida muy cordial a todas las que hablan español.
Hello, everyone. I want to also welcome in Spanish all the Spanish participants, and I also want to take this opportunity to explain that we will have the simultaneous translation to English and Spanish and vice versa. So if you take a look at the lower part of your screen, you will see a little a sign of the little globe sign, which says interpretation. So for all of those who wish to listen to this webinar in English can put English, and those who want to listen to it in Spanish can put and click on Spanish.
That is called interpretation. You should be able to click on this little world and choose the language you want. So if you want to listen in English, you will have the interpretation in English while the moderators in Spanish are talking. And any difficulties, please, you can write in the chat. If you are not listening well or something, we will pick this information up. Thank you. So we will start. We have a good panelists, a good set of panelists today that I will introduce, and each one they will talk for 10 minutes each one, and to introduce also their approaches and their experiences. If we want to ask questions and comments, we will make a Q&A questions by the end of the seminar. But you can also write questions in the chat. So we have the little chat down in the bar. So you're welcome to put there what you want. What is our seminar topic? Today in the webinar, we are going to talk about the common experiences of migrant women and girls, refugee, domestic workers, and those of a part of family reunification, undocumented women, how we are coping with COVID measures in Europe. How is this really affecting as migrant women, the COVID measures that we are having? And secondly, we might highlight how migrant women have worked together to provide essential support, safe spaces, and collective action through campaigning and advocacy in these times that are crucial and really, completely different what is normal, the time. So we are having a really specific time. If we have time enough, we will also go and work on to suggestions and recommendations that we need to make, that needs to be done to make sure that rights of women, migrant women, are not excluded from the upcoming COVID measures and the future on the ongoing recovery packages that are presented by the EU and the different governments. So it's also important, I recall that if you want to add any recommendation, you are always welcome to write down in the chat, and we can always take these recommendations on in the minutes. I also want to recall this webinar is going to be recorded. This is mainly for our own background information. We will also share it also, and normally White Plus takes this as archive for own knowledge and documentation. So if there is somebody who has an issue on being recorded, please let us know. We can take you out from the list. I mean, you can attend the webinar, but later for the archives, we can erase your name, and we can erase your how you say, las huellas, that the traces that you leave also in the on the web. So just for security reasons. So I might start already. I will introduce today. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 panelists. If I'm not missing anybody, we have Jennifer Kamau. We will start with Jennifer if we are okay with this. Jennifer, she's the co-founder of International Women's Space in Germany. In the International Women's Space is an anti-racist feminist group consisting of refugee and migrant women, as well as women without this experience. The group was formed during the occupation of Oranienplatz, a square in Berlin's district, and the Hegard Hauptmannshall in Berlin. International Women's Space fosters solidarity and cooperation among migrant women, publishes books and organizes campaigns, protests, and conferences on the topics of seeking asylum and migrant women's struggles. Jennifer, please, you're welcome. Can you please unmute yourself?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, welcome.
Yeah.
So if you want to start sharing with us what you wanted to share about the experiences of women, migrant women in Germany, about the COVID, you are welcome. The room is for you.
Okay. Thank you very much for the possibility to be in a platform with these enormous women. And I will start first of all by highlighting or projecting what the situation of the refugees, to be specific, in Germany is, and then we come to the topic of the migrants. And COVID brought a situation of, COVID just projected the situation of migrant and refugee women in Germany in the context of, when you think of where the refugees and the Heims are homes where the refugees are kept. They are always in places where it's so isolated. In most scenarios, after the train station, you have to take a bus that takes you for around 20 minutes. This bus, in some situations, this bus, after 5 o'clock, doesn't operate anymore. In the weekends, some of the buses don't operate anymore. So if you arrive at these stations and you have no connections to where you are supposed to go, this is complicated. And this is very well structured to isolate people who are not supposed to be visible in the country of Germany, for example. Then comes COVID-19. They brought down the pandemic measures that were ruled out by the Ministry of Health, for example. And this completely excluded the refugee women who are living in the Heims. Because one, there was the isolation that is already a structural problem. And then there was the situation of the lockdown situation. So already people who have already been locked out normally were forced to be locked out as a second time. There was a challenge with the languages, of course. So when every information was being transmitted on how the lockdown was going to be, actually we had to make a public press release to demand that these people, the women, also should be included in the measures that were being taken. Then with time, there was the chaos that came from this, because then the pandemic, the health procedure was to isolate people, was to lock down people. And in these structures in the Heim, it was impossible to take these measures because people were sharing common facilities, utilities, like they have to share the kitchens, they have to share the bathrooms. Some are put 5 of them in one single room. And the pandemic measures that were stipulated by the Ministry of Health talked about isolation or you know, this was impossible. it was completely impossible for people who are sharing common utilities like the toilets and the bathroom, like I have already mentioned. And then there comes the language barrier. Everything is communicated in German, and it takes quite a lot of time before this information reaches people in the language, not their own languages, but the other colonial languages that people speak in these structures. So it created such a situation where it became so complicated. Everybody was afraid during the pandemic. And this fear was normal. It's a fear of death. But this is a situation which the people who are fleeing here are faced on an everyday basis. The reason why people flee are not put into whatever situations that people arrive here. And the language was a critical thing. The spacing, 1.5 meters spacing that was demanded by the Ministry of Health was impossible. And then we saw a situation whereby when people were being told to sanitize and wash your hands and stock food, how was it going to be possible for women who are sharing one room, 5 or 4 of them, who with a quadrat meter of 20 quadrat meters, be able to stock food, because everybody was rushing to, to keep the foods for themselves. How was it going to be possible? This 1.5 meters up distance between, how was it going to be possible for people who were already put in one building? The other situation we saw is that we were asked to wash our hands and sanitize. These detergents, washing detergents, were not even available. In the beginning, they were not available in these hives. The sanitizers was also not available. So we were asking ourselves, the COVID-19 was something that the whole world was dealing with. Does it mean that when some people are in certain countries are not included in national measures that are that apply to the people living in these countries? And why does it have to be that for us to receive even the basic human treatment, it has to be a struggle? So those are some of the challenges that were there in this time.
Thank you, Jennifer. I see, and I think your example is really the main big question that COVID is just putting even more forward, that it's a matter of privilege, and the people who are in a really good situation are the only ones who can really have a convenient lockdown, and that is the reality that we are living and confronting here in Europe, actually, that we assume that everybody is in the same capacity to have a lockdown measure, and then it's going to be right for everybody. While there is a lot of people outside who are don't have the conditions to have a great lockdown as demanded, and so that's, I mean, it's quite important that we have to bring here up. So I want to bring this, thank you. I want to invite to the second person to the conversation. Just I wanted to highlight that this White Plus is making now a campaign, and we are making a tracking of funds for migrant women and migrant women funds. So we are working on mapping and identifying those organizations that are really making efforts to support migrant women and self-organized migrant women work, because this is fundamental to the work of all migrant women in Europe. Thank you. So I would like to give the floor. I'm going through I have the list here. I have the second person here, Julissa. Yulisa, de la Alianza por la Solidaridad en España. Muchas gracias por estar hoy con nosotras, Yulisa. Yulisa is a political scientist, expert on migration. She will present the Spanish white political movement. There is the campaign I hope you will explain later, Regularización Ya, which is led by migrant and anti-racist organizations and are supported for more than 1,300 civil society organizations. And the movement has just presented a non-legislative motion into the Spanish parliament for the regulation of 600,000 migrants in irregular administrative situation in Spain, which was backed up by 5 parliamentarian groups. So Julia, thank you very much. Te cedo la palabra.
Hello, I am very happy to be here with all of you. As you mentioned, I will speak a little bit about this movement of regularization, and I'm thinking of all these persons who don't maybe know well the context of all of us living here with the pandemic in Spain. I would try to place it in 3 thematic areas. First of them would be what would be the regularization. Secondly, what have we accomplished so far, and where are we now? What is the regularization? Well, it is, as I mentioned before, state movement, which covers and includes more than 100 organizations dedicated to protecting migrant rights. Now, it is a movement which is led by migrant collectives and also counts on the help of different political movements, cultural movements, social movements. So within the support of NGOs, social services, the Alliance also participates. So within this context, and especially within the concept of pandemic, for us it's important to make an analysis of different organizations on state level to see a little bit about their initiatives that have been initiated when it comes to regularization within Spain, but also to broaden it a little bit on a state level, professional level, and trying to have a bigger impact on political and social level as well. So what we do and why we do it, because analyzing, we found that one of the most endangered collectives and communities during this pandemic was surely the migrant community. Now, I wanted to emphasize that before initiating these processes, the communities of migrant women, especially those working in home care, were very much in favor of this regularization. So it is because of their initiative and within the legal framework of this state movement, we have tried to pressure a little bit this regularization, trying to support one of the communities who was really being very much endangered with this pandemic and this situation. So this is not something that is now worse with the crisis. This is something that has been a problem for a lot of years, for a long time. So migrants from who are in Spain, as from other parts of Europe, are always being abused, are always being used in their without any respect for their labor rights. So in that sense, we have been trying to pressure different commissions and work group, as well as those who were dedicated to political sciences, different communities. So we have tried to analyze all of these issues step by step, and with that I want to pass to the second point, which is what have we done so far. So first of all, we wrote an official letter to the government. So this was followed by different press releases, different publication, in order to put an additional pressure to the governmental structures. Now, we wanted for the government to take due note to regularization of so many persons who are searching for ways to regularize their status within Spain. So all of these packages of social measures, economic measures, who were accessible to all Spanish population, were simply not there for all of these migrant and refugee groups. They were just out of it. They were completely on the outskirts. That was unpermissible. So that is why we wrote this official letter. We actually tried to, first of all, make their situation obvious and public to everyone. Then afterwards, we wanted to emphasize that in that post-pandemic phase of this crisis, they are going to be needed even more. And we didn't want them to be even more endangered with the this situation of unequal rights in the country. So we try to propose the change, a complete change of migratory politics. So we needed to emphasize that the lives of people need to matter, that the lives of people need to be the center and the focus of all migratory politics, not as it was done until now, that we have a very racist, at least in Spain, a very racist law on foreigners. So we needed to put their lives first. Now, we have also managed to elaborate a proposal where we seeked for a minimal amount they are supposed to receive. So the government put that project into action. They started executing it, especially for people who did not have official documents. So why we wanted to simply reach different political groups and try to change that situation, but not in the sense of making it as an exception. So these persons could have access to all these measures, but under certain conditions, if they have been women who have been victims of violence or of any kind of abuse. Now, the third point was that after the Commission for Social and Economical Reconstruction in the Congress was initiated, we wanted to establish what are going to be the future steps or the steps which we're going to take after the pandemic. So we elaborated a document which needed to include migrant persons because they being in an irregular situation and undocumented, they are still here in our country. They're already included and are part of our country. So one of the Congress deputies read this document during the assembly. So it was really, the issue was sort of public and recognized as important. So the last thing was the presentation of an initiative of legislative initiative, which is trying to inspire and pressure government to make a different stand when it comes to regularization of 600,000 migrants in Spain. So this is a political work. This is a political strategy more than anything else. So we are trying to negotiate, to initiate dialogue with different political actors. So on the 19th of June, we have managed for these documents to be read, elaborated, and to gather comments from the very migrant communities, which was very important to getting their insight. So in addition to that, we have managed to receive at the end, as a final result, the support of 8 political parties, which is a good step. And hopefully this will be then a part of the congressional issues which will follow on future assemblies. Now, the final thing is that we are trying to include this proposition in the law. So now this Sunday, 19th of July, we are going to celebrate different protests all over Spain, trying to make this issue more visible. So this is very important because we need to make it evident that this issue doesn't belong only to these communities, but it's something that is much broader than that. It's something that affects us all. Migrant persons, yes, who are actively participating in the initiative because they do want to work. They do want to be a part of this community, but who have been so dedicated to this entire process and who made it their own, which is a noble process and a just one, which would terminate in final achieving regular status of all these persons. Now, what we are going to do is we will keep pressuring the government and the Congress and trying to achieve results in that sense. So this is what we are trying to do continuously, to continue with our dialogue. This cannot be a one-time thing. This situation needs to be and serve as a pillar for something additional. So we need to make sure that these migrant women who are now in these times of pandemic, who were all home care workers, who were so needed and so essential, home working staff, are now in these situations, as well as others, migrant men who and refugees who work in field. So we cannot allow that this pandemic now keeps them apart from all the alleviating measures available to other citizens and made available by the government. So they cannot be completely excluded from everything that has to do with some basic living needs and some normal living needs. So we need to make sure that they have decent lives, and we need to make sure that decent lives are not exclusive to just some groups, and that they are all inclusive. And I don't know if I have more time, or should I finish now? Okay, so that is that. But afterwards we can elaborate a little bit more, but that was basically that. Thank you so much, Yulisa, for the information. I think that it was very crucial for all of us to see. Now it's especially very important to make these people more visible to the others of the community, but to the members and representatives of the systems, which is really crucial. So, and it's inspiring for the rest of us all over Europe to get us moving to fight for the same issues. So thank you very much, Yulisa. For all of those who have now just been joining this webinar, you can listen to translation in English or Spanish according to your preferences. Just by clicking on the little globe, which is on the bottom of your screen, where it says interpretation, and there you can choose the language of your interest. We will have also time to exchange experiences for Q&A, but that's going to be at the end. So please just be patient. And in addition, you can use the chat option and write your questions or comments, which will be afterwards replied to.
Languages, you choose in which language you want to have your interpretation. We will open Q&A questions towards the end of the presentations. Thank you. And I have in my list Tamara Cruz, de la organización Siempre. Tamara has been working in the field of social gender justice and promoting the artisan sector in the development and rural community and design projects in Mexico. She was the founder of Development of Crafts Projects Design. In Belgium, she's living now in Belgium, and Tamara is founder of the organization Siempre. The aim of this organization is to make women from Latin America and the Caribbean living in Belgium visible, promote their participation, and offer activities to support well-being of migrant women. Thank you, Tamara. The room is for you. Muchas gracias y bienvenida, Tamara. Gracias.
Hola, bueno, gracias a la invitación, a Marcela, a ustedes, a
Stella,
por...
thanks to all of you for inviting me, Christina, to you as well. Now, I would like to explain a little bit what is Siempre. It is an organization which we have established in 2017, and we have established two consultancies, offices, which are there in order for us to be able to have and maintain continuous communication with migrant women, and also to see a little bit about their routes and their itinerary. How do they arrive in Belgium? How are they being afterwards incorporated in daily life? How are they doing? So through different work groups, we are trying to promote all these dialogues so we can then a little bit have a better view of the process of immigration, integration, and then to see a little bit how can they be related to different and how are they connecting to different institutions which have their which are from Belgium. So how do they connect to them? How do they help them? How do they help them to find job? How do they help them to find access to health services? And whether or not they're tackling issues that have to do with violence related abuses. Now, we have been since 2018 been working with these groups that have to do with migration. So the primary one, which is in Belgium, is the one that from 2010 we have noticed, we started since we noticed the first waves of migrants. So we were trying to, in bicultural pairs, to do a special integration of women, those who are single, those who arrived with their children, those who didn't have any regularized or documented stay. So we try to always find someone who is speaking their languages. So for us, it was really important um, to help them out and to help them achieve, to help them stay connected with their families. And because we know that during their itinerary, they often lose those family connections. So we were trying to understand a little bit more their experience, especially from the Latin American women and when they arrived to Belgium. So um, we were trying to explore their migratory trajectory to understand better who are they and what do they want to do. I mean, what and how are they coping in Belgium once they arrive. So we have understood that this migratory trajectory of migrant women and migrants in general, so it was usually persons of 39 years old, more or less, and they have all had a higher level of education. So around 42 percent of them, it was bachelor degree, and postgraduate degree was even a higher percentage. So even 73% of them was married. So that showed us that they arrived, the majority of them arrives with families. So 60% of them have children who are usually very small, not older than 1 year old. So this all shows us that they are coming here to find in seeking jobs, and they want their children to live in a different kind of environment. So what they dedicate initially the time upon arrival was to write their CVs, curriculums. They're trying to get inserted into the employment climate of Belgium, and afterwards they need to also try to establish contact and relations with the institutions who are not speaking their language and who are not very clear about the procedure. So in addition to that, they need to study a lot and learn the new English. So uh, in all of these processes, the family reunion and family ties get often broken and even end up in divorce. So for them, it's a very difficult situation, and sometimes they are even in a situation where they don't have the option to prove to the new country authorities that they are actually the parents of their children. So that is what at the end leads to different types of discrimination, violence, everything something that is related to not regular stay in the foreign country. So most of them are afraid that they are going to get into trouble. So they usually stay at home. They don't report violence to anyone. So they stay at home and they live in a situation of violence. Others usually stay to taking care of their children and still don't report anything, still always feeling even more distance from the new community and the new society. So they often just stay in contact with some of the family and friends at home through social networks and internet, but at the end they end up feeling depressed and completely isolated from the rest of the community. Now, for us, it was important to understand how the social services try to help them out, especially migrant women, those with children, single parents, all of these persons who have had to suffer through this isolation and who didn't get the support of appropriate services. Now, the system unfortunately ignores their troubles usually because there is a misunderstanding, lack of information, because both them and the institutions don't speak the same language. Uh, so they have a number of obstacles to get to the social services and to get some help that they usually these services are not even aware of the amount of problems they are facing because they don't approach them and the services really don't investigate. Now, the Belgium was a particularly interesting country to explain a little bit how the ethnical sanctions are being imposed when it comes to recruiting of women. In that sense, Belgium is very interesting because it has very unequal employment rates. So in some of the studies, you could see how many people actually achieve getting job in Belgium. So you can see the difference among that between migrant women and Belgian women. You can see in addition to what kind of jobs they have access to and to what kind of pension and social funds they count on, which are very poor. So we have here that in Belgium, more than 80% of women who are have a regular status, who have regular documentation, can count on finding a better job. On the other hand, migrant women who have higher education, being in a situation as they are and not having access to a different kind of services, are not very competitive in this kind of labor market. In addition to that, they need at least a year to have to gain a fair knowledge of the new language and being therefore apt and able to work in a new environment. In some of the studies where the Belgian population was asked in one of the surveys about migrant women, they um, uh, have a different view on how big is the percentage of migrant women there and what was there actually the study tried to explain what was the level of integration and the response, whether or not it was positive when it comes to the Belgian population. So we have seen there that even the Belgian community found that it was very challenging because in order to learn the language, it would really take a lot. Afterwards, you would need a driving permit for the majority of jobs. You would need a lot of money for all the expenses which would follow on all of those additional trainings and education, which makes the situation even more so difficult. Now, we have also analyzed all these migratory routes and we wanted to simply emphasize all of the problematic and difficulties which they have been facing. So at this moment, during this crisis, they especially have a problem when it comes to finding adequate care for their children while they're working. So we try to find out what did they do before they came to Belgium. So a lot of them was working, 25% was studying, and only 9% was dedicated to family. Now we then try to include other organizations both in Europe and on the international level, trying to make them more visible and trying to ensure that they take advantage of this human capital by, on the other hand, also aiding those women and helping them out and finding a job and feeling more included in the new community they find themselves with. So we wanted also to see what was the plan of these women when they come to Belgium. When we made this question to them, they said that it was usually because of their partner. Some came to study, some came to work, and just a few said economic opportunities. So 36% said that they wanted to work, and only 11 said that they didn't have any clue what they wanted to do. But what, once again, majority said was they came because of their partner. Now, there are very uh, uh, there are very much obstacles when it comes to coming to a new country. So they were asked about, do they have any idea about how difficult integration was? So they said that they knew a little bit about the process, but only few knew really what it does it mean to go through the migration process, and only 29, for example, spoke French, which was a very low percentage, having in mind that it is one of the official languages in Belgium. So 80% when it comes to problematic areas did mention the language, but didn't know exactly the procedures that await them once they come to the country. And only a few said and noted the legalization of their stay as a big issue. Now, when it comes to the procedures regarding asylum center and immigration procedures, they weren't there that aware. They had better information about how to immigrate to Northern American countries. However, they didn't really know when it comes to Europe. Other issue, which was of socioeconomic nature for them, was also the one that has to do with their natural environment and the environment where they came from, which was included a lot of violence, a lot of protests, and unsafe general environment. So Latin American women understood that that environment, especially those with children, wasn't an environment which was safe. So they went even without trying to, prior to that, investigate how they could adapt properly. Now, we have established that lack of information is one of the key issues why they get into different difficulties in a new environment and what is actually preventing integration, in addition to elitism, racism, gender roles, discrimination. Now, we have been present during their itinerary once they come, and we have been tracking their institutional itinerary. But after the pandemic initiated, that for us was a big difficulty, and we have tried to use internet as well as social networks to help them out with translations, etc. Sometimes we would assist them in person in one of those meetings. We would be present during contracts they need to sign, for example, with official institutions, lawyers, etc. Now, other point which needs to be emphasized are the sexual rights and family planning, which is also difficult once you are in a new country. Now, this is very particular issue since it has to do with sexual violence, unwanted pregnancy. Now, do they really have sufficient information to reach services and institutions who actually can aid them? We were trying to direct them to free legal aid, lawyers, as well as medical specialists who could help them out, in particular in cases where we were speaking about minor women who have went through sexual violence or had unwanted pregnancies. Now, with the pandemic, they have had to, those who have been violence victims, they have sadly had to stay at home with the violent perpetrator, with the person who was abusing them, which was a horrible situation. And in the country, there was no mechanism as well as measure implemented to alleviate and change that. Now, thank you. Tamara, just please, if you can go wrapping up because we are really over time. Something just really specific, just as a conclusion. Yes, I would just like to say that the term minorities is from the Second World War, and I think that we need to once again reevaluate and requalify these minorities, which are now majorities, and that we need to simply consider them as human capital and to try to integrate them into these countries. Thank you very much, Tamara, for this presentation, which really shows the true reality and the state of migrant women.
Interpreter to have a little rest of the Spanish presentations to shift to an English presentation. Alexandra, welcome you to the room. After Alexandra, we will introduce Marcela also. Thank you, Alexandra. The room is for you.
Okay, thank you very much for having me.
Yes.
Really happy to be here. This is it was really interesting to listen to you, and these are topics I've been sort of following, even if they're not my political focus now for many, many years, and it's so fascinating to come back to them, but also a little bit disappointing to see that not much has changed actually in the situation of migrant women in Europe. I mean, that's really a frustrating experience, but I'm really happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me. And I think this shows, especially what I'm going to say might look a little bit off topic later, because I'm not going to speak about migrant women specifically, but about the European Recovery Fund and about the situation of European women in that and all the economic aspects. But it really shows the importance of intersectionality, because everything that happens to European women in general will be a lot worse probably for migrant women living in Europe. And this is something we have to take on board, but it's a women's issues as well. So thanks for this initiative.
Thank you, Alexandra. I'm really sorry I didn't introduce you to the panel, so I want to also give some lines. Alexandra Guest, she is the member of European Parliament since 2019 election. She's a member of the Committee on Budget and Committee on the Internal Market and Consumer Protection. She's also a member of the European Internet Forum, and on behalf of the group of the Greens, European Free Alliance, she initiated the review study Next Generation EU Leaves Women Behind, which reviews the EU recovery package and its gender perspective. This is very important for the study of White Plus, which is launching soon, the campaign and study on trafficking and also in EU funds towards women migrant associations. Thank you, Alexandra.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I'll speak about half of it, which is the petition I launched. Just before I go into that, since you spoke in the beginning about financing for migrant women, I had a quick look because I'm also a member of the budget committee, and I had a quick look, and the two programs that would be interesting for your financing both have been cut basically. And that's something shocking, you know, from your perspective and my perspective, that in this crisis, this is not taken into account. One is the Rights and Values Program, which is basically the only program the European Union has to support women's organization. citizens' participation, and the work against domestic violence, which we all know is a huge issue for women in general and for migrant women in particular. And that program has been cut in the proposal of the council, which is not final yet, by 20%. Fortunately, a lot of voices in parliament, especially those of my group, but I think other group will be supporting that, are asking for reinstating the original amount for the Rights and Values program, which could finance your initiatives as well. Maybe it's already doing that, I don't know. The other one is the Asylum and Migration and Integration Fund, which is just a little bit more than the previous term, which started in 2014. So the numbers were decided in 2012 and 2013, basically when the situation was still different in Europe. And it's just a little bit higher and a lot less than the Commission suggested. So that is absolutely disappointing, considering that during COVID times, we would need a lot more money. Just to start on that one. I would like to show you a presentation. I'll try to share my screen if I can. Yes, I can. Okay, here you go. You're seeing it, right? So I started half of it, which is a petition which you find on WeMove. If you just look for WeMove, half of it, you can sign it. I would invite you to do so. Because I think I have to close my window because there's the working outside, sorry. I think in the beginning of the crisis, of the COVID-19 crisis, there was a lot of shock, there was a lot of fear for everybody trying to understand what was going on, but there was some hope that people working in the care sector, and that's mostly women and a lot of migrant women in all kinds of care work, would be more appreciated, because we realized how important essential workers were, with women in the supermarket cashiers, women in hospitals, women taking care of children and emergency childcare services, and women taking care of the elderly who are particularly at risk by coronavirus. And they were visible. Usually care work is invisible, and that's why one of the reasons why it's so easy to discriminate against the people working there and to pay them badly. And all of a sudden they were really visible. And in every political event, people got up and applauded for the care workers, and people stood on their balconies all over Europe and applauded for the care workers. And I think there was some hope that women's work would be more appreciated, and also migrants' women's work would be more appreciated in the beginning. And that hope was completely disappointed, because as the crisis proceeded, we all realized there's going to be not only a health crisis, but a huge economic crisis. And the recession, so the drop in growth is probably going to be at 2 figures for the worst countries like Italy, for example, and at around 6% in the best ones like Germany. And if that translates into an increase of unemployment, we are looking towards very, very worrying times and very hard times. And we all know that the poorest part of the population, women and migrants, are usually most hit by that kind of crisis. So what I tried to do was to look into what the governments are doing, and especially what Europe is doing as a member of the European Parliament, to overcome a crisis. And what Europe is doing, it's preparing an enormous package called the Recovery Fund with 750 billion euro. This is an enormous amount of money in order to invest into the European economy. And so I think if we had to decide where do we invest that money, we would probably say, well, we should do something for workers losing their jobs. So for employment, we should do quite a lot for the care sector, where people are completely underpaid. And well, and I'm a green, so we should do something for the climate, which is important for us and for our children as well. And I had the suspicion that this wasn't happening. So I asked my political group, the Green Zephyr group, to do a gender impact assessment. So a study where we look at what are the consequences of this kind of policy, and specifically in the Recovery Fund, which is now called Next Generation EU. What is it doing for women in particular? And this is what I would like to share with you today. So the recovery context is called Next Generation EU. We asked 2 researchers, one from Austria and one from Italy, to look into that. And they cover, oh, I can't read this because I see your wonderful pictures. Let me just, okay, go ahead. So this is what they did. I'll try to run through it a little quickly. The aim is, first of all, to give an overview of the current situation, and then provide an overview of the potential gender impacts of these funds of the European Commission, and putting forward recommendations for policy making. That means for people like me who then have to have some influence on the laws regulating this. No, this doesn't work. Okay, here we go. Here you see all the different aspects that are being considered. I'm not going to walk you through all of this because it's going to take too much time. But one of the most important ones are care, paid and unpaid care work, and employment and related issues. I can share this presentation with anybody who's interested afterwards. Okay, this is just to say what are the obligations of the European Union in terms of gender equality. It's not that I think this is something European unions should do, but there are very precise obligations anchored in the treaties, and there's very clear commitments undersigned by governments. So it's something the European Union has to do. And this is the list of where that it's written. Okay, so here we come to the more interesting things. The corona crisis has large effects on the health and on the social and economic well-being, especially the ones of women, because women make up the majority of the healthcare workforce. Around 80% of people working in the health sector are women. That means they have a greater risk of infection. And women have been carrying out most of the unpaid work because schools and childcare facilities, for example, closed. That means in the distribution of labor we still have in our families in Europe and almost everywhere, that women have to stay home and take care of the children. It's women doing the extra work. It's not the men. And we have studies documenting that. Women at the same time face higher risks of job loss, job and income loss, because they shift for a couple of reasons. They shift their working time from paid to unpaid work. You know, if you have to take care of your children the whole day, you can't work. If you have to do the extra homeschooling, like we had to do in most countries, you don't have the time for work. So a lot of women are dropping out of the paid labor market. And there's an increased risk of violence. One of the previous speakers mentioned that violence, exploitation, abuse, harassment during times of crisis and quarantine, domestic violence, and this is especially true for care workers who work in a domestic setting. Okay. Then the other problem is that women are a lot more likely to work in those sectors that are hit particularly hard by the crisis, which are those sectors that have been also called the client-facing sectors. So not industrial sectors where you work with objects, which are typically male-dominated industry, but in those industries where you work with people, for example, care, but also restaurants, food service, hotels, tourism, real estate, wholesale and retail trade, like supermarkets, shops, and so on, all kinds of therapies. And we have very reliable data saying that unemployment is skyrocketing in those sectors. So the people who are staying at home are the women for 2 reasons, because they have to take care of the family, sick people, children, elderly, and because the sectors where women work in the majority are particularly hard hit. So in Italy, we have a dropout, really a dropout of female workers, so they don't even register as unemployed, of up to 25%. The number of the last month was 20%, and researchers are expecting them to rise. 20% is an enormous amount. And this is not even counting the women who are losing their jobs, who are being laid off. It's just the women who drop out, who decide on their own they can't work anymore, they can't do paid work anymore. In Germany, 27% of mothers reduced the number of working hours. So here you see, this is really interesting because here you see which are the sectors that are most hit by the corona crisis, which is education, something we didn't expect because education, we think it's public, but this includes, for example, all the private childcare services. You know, and that means for every woman losing her job in education, there's another woman probably losing her job because she has to stay home and take care of her child. So that's 2 women. Then health and social work, accommodation, food services, arts, culture, and recreation. And we see that these are all sectors where the share of female workers is very high, around 70, 80%. So it's women losing their jobs if these businesses close down. And on the right side, you see those sectors where the European Recovery and Resilience Fund, Next Generation EU, wants to invest. Because they say they want to focus on climate and on digital, which is not mistaken. I think it's a good strategy, basically, but it's short-sighted. It's not inclusive. So we have sectors like construction, agriculture, energy, transport, and information and communications. That's the IT industry. That's where the money is supposed to go. So, and there you see, you have a male share of workers, which is around 70%, 80%. And the higher you go in the echelons, the higher the share of male labor is. So the higher the salaries, the more men are around and less women. So we have a complete mismatch between those, the gender that is victim of the crisis, that is hit, and those who get the money. And this is absolutely crazy. And this is something nobody noticed before I started half of it and did all the work around it. Okay, I'm looking at time, so I'm basically repeating this. So what can we do about this? It's not completely wrong to invest in climate and in the digital industry in Europe, but I think we need to counterbalance it with very strong investments in the care sector. That means schools and childcare. We have to make sure that schools can stay open next year. We still, for example, I live in Germany and I follow Italy very closely. And the government still doesn't have any plans on how to keep schools open. They just don't know how to do it. You know, we won't have a vaccine against corona in September, and schools probably will work, who knows, for a couple of weeks, and then maybe children are supposed to stay home if there's a new outbreak. The whole care sector needs enormous amount of money, and you know that because many migrant women work in that sector. The whole care sector in Europe only works because we have migrant working women doing the labor. And that's because that's the kind of labor that traditionally women were supposed to do without being paid for it. And therefore it's not included in the definition of economy until it's paid. And even when it's paid, it's supposed to be paid as little as possible. And that is the reason where there is such an amount of exploitation in the care sector. I think, who was that who mentioned that? Don't remember if Ulissa or Tamara, somebody mentioned women getting sick because they work in the care sector, especially with the elderly. I'm in touch with a woman you might know who leads a Romanian Women Association in Italy. There are many Romanians working all over. It's not only migrant women coming from other countries, but also many Romanian women coming, or women from the Eastern countries in Western Europe. And they call it the Italian syndrome. It was quite similar to what you described briefly. So it would be, I don't know if you're not in touch yet, I would like to put you in touch, because I think this is something really we need to work on to finance the care sector and then really highlight what kind of health impact that organization of the care sector based on exploitation has. And the Recovery Fund is one of the places where to start highlighting that.
Thank you, Alexandra. We are reaching out the maximum time and we still have to, I mean, it's really interesting. I find it really precious that you are bringing this in and so insightful information to us and to highlight also what is the investment done that is really not matching the care work and the care system. Thank you. We have one speaker more. We have Marcela, and Marcela, after Marcela, we have also one person, Alina Smith, who wants to make some information also. So Marcela, the room is for you. Marcela, she's an activist feminist from years ago, really invested in all women's movement in Belgium and across Europe and Latin America. So she's now like really stepping forward la Marche Mondiale des Femmes in Belgium, the Women's March, World March. So the room is for you, Marcela. Gracias. Marcela, tu micrófono, por favor. Marcela, tu micrófono.
¿Está bien? Ahora
gracias, sí. Ya.
Ya, gracias. Estoy compartiendo una presentación, ¿es que se ve?
Se ve perfecto.
Perfecto. Bueno, muchas gracias por la invitación. Soy muy contenta de estar en este panel y de conocer y cosas tan interesantes que se están haciendo y tantas preguntas.
Be able to exchange with you all these issues, opinions. It's something that affects us all. So what I wanted to share with you is precisely, very shortly and briefly, what were the responses of the country to the necessities of migrant women in Belgium? Is it working? Is it moving? Is there a slideshow? No? Okay. Okay. It's working now. So as Christina mentioned, for this year, we are going to be celebrating 20 years of our existence. Now every year in Belgium, we have a manifestation which is dedicated to a March of Migrant Women. So it's very important for feminist world, for feminist community, for women community. It includes women of all colors, of all cultures. So we have now been focusing on migration issues, and especially before the pandemic, we were trying to initiate a strategy which would help out all the migrant women, including myself. I'm a migrant woman from many years ago. So this is what the issues we were trying to make more visible to everyone. So we were trying to seek what was the response of the Belgium state to all this. So first of all, the administrative process in Belgium is very difficult. So first of all, we need to see the whole structure of Belgium as a country. We have a interministerial federal conference. So it has to be done with national coordination, since it's a federal country. So it needed to include all of the aspects of violence. So both the one in marriage and the one in confinement. Now, in addition, there was an issue of financing, which was first financing from existing structures, and then additional financing, which would be separated for special services that could assist, for example, in cases of domestic violence, etc. So this was the promise of the state during the pandemic, that they will be maintaining their operational level during all time. But what we can see about all this is that there is no special vision, and there is no visibility of certain groups of women who, for the society in general, migrant women who, for the society, are in general invisible. So these strategies were not all inclusive in that sense. So the first measure, one of the measures, was about giving an opportunity to women during confinement and who cannot leave and be in the street, to give them access to a special phone number. So at the beginning, for example, during the first 3 weeks or 2 3 weeks, two first weeks, I have been working and cooperating with a center against domestic violence. There were a lot of phone calls, but after the 3 initial weeks, it was even more so increased, and there opened another phone line which was for children, boys and girls. So this was a very powerful indicator about how the violence raised, and what needed to be done is to also activate further the capacities in response to these telephone, to these lines. Now, another aspect was related to helping out women who have been victims of violence, family violence, not just physical abuse, but all kinds of violence. So what was the response initially was opening hotels which would work as centers for shelter for women in that situation. So it was organized in different regions so women could access these services. Especially important to mention is that these hotels were financed by government, so it was related in with other services protecting women's rights in Belgium, which then made a good network for connection and making information of them more available to other women. So that social service was open to everyone from the Belgium and the European community in general. Now, the problem with these financing support, these hotels, was that they never took into account the situation of women who do not have regular situation in the country, who do not have regular documents in the country. So if we're speaking about when the pandemic started until now, um, you, there was plenty of time to do a significant moves forward to change that situation, but it's not a reality that is visible to everyone. So they are simply not included and absolutely have no access to all these services, including these shelters and hotels, which were converted into shelters in cases of domestic violence. So that was the problem. So there was a general indicator that as the pandemic was ongoing, the domestic violence was increased. However, no one actually managed to include these group of women into the services which were being offered by the government, which was a big issue. So women who had no papers, who had no regular status, had basically no access to social services. They only could approach some specialized organization and services, and they did, but there was no systematic governmental response to their situation. When it comes to judicial system, also out of the reasons previously mentioned, and for the same reasons, the access to these services is additionally difficult as well. There have been some initiatives by the state in certain regions where they would open a phone service for women who wanted to report domestic violence, and they would go and check out the domicile, but that was not enough. Now, after the intervention of that interministerially group, they upon their initiative, managed to put as priority violence against women. Now, when it comes to migrant women, they if they don't have a regular status, they're not going to be contacting the police, and they will not be searching for any contact with the justice system whatsoever because of fear of their own stay and possibility of stay in the country. So that is why these services, although potentially accessible and to them, were not actually. So the police could not intervene without violence being reported. In addition, we had issues related to sexual health and reproductive health. So besides an increase of sexual assaults and sexual violence in general. We had some cases of unwanted pregnancy, especially among minor women and adolescent women who were younger than 18 years old. So risk to pass that limit, legally allowed limit, in order to have an abortion was always lingering over them, and they would often, for lack of information or access to adequate service, pass that limit and finding themselves in a very difficult situation. So the topic of health is a global issue, especially reproductive health, but especially with not having access to health services in general. And in pandemic time, it's because of fear of catching a disease and being in a place where perhaps you can have contact with someone who is contagious. So in addition to that, there is also the same issue with the access to health system as before for those who do not have proper documentation. So these were direct impacts to basic services, which migrant women suffered in general, but also even more so and to a greater extent during the pandemic time. Now, when it comes to economic measures during confinement, they were not completely suspended at this time, but some people and citizen had opportunity to receive certain help from the state. However, migrant women once again did not have access to this, even though they have been in home workers. They were, for example, home cleaners who were working and living in the home. But then afterwards, since they were living in the place of work, they, during pandemics, if they were no longer within the same household, so they would at the same time stay without a job and without a home. Once again, their access to social services is practically rendered impossible by the system, so they were in an impossible situation. Thank you. Thank you, Marcela. Let's let's just wrap up if we can. Sure, I'm gonna finish with this. So without funds, without money, without bank statement, bank account, for them it's completely impossible to participate in a normal social life. They cannot pay sometimes for a telephone call to their family because they live in a very distant countries. So the telephone call is an issue economically. So all of these issues are interconnected and make their lives impossible. So this is now, this pandemic especially has raised a series of issues and questions, and these women need specific answers that they're not receiving from the state. Thank you so much, Marcela, for all of this information and for describing the situation, not just in Belgium, but also the reaction of the country. And we are very grateful that now the governments have a little bit more feminists fighting for the cause in general, for the cause for women. And so thank you.
for Alina, and then we will have a little bit more. I will propose to go for 10 minutes extra then to a chat on conversations, and this chat will be you will raise the hand on participants, and then you can and then we can facilitate conversations. Alina, please, the word is for you.
Thank you so much, Christina. And thank you so much for Wide Plus for the invitation to join today. It's been really, really enriching to hear all the speakers share from their national contexts. I was going to just quickly, in a minute or two, share a word about the perspective of PICUM. We're an international platform of NGOs working on the rights of undocumented migrants. And I don't want to repeat really what has been shared already, but just to share the extent to which what has been said really echoes what we've been hearing from our network. And just to kind of reiterate that, I mean, in the context of undocumented people, the background against which we're operating is one where regular status is criminalized, where there is significant institutional discrimination and already very limited access to services in most cases. And so what we've seen, we recently did a survey of our members, and it really does speak to the issues that have been already highlighted, that what they have seen is an important reduction, limitations in the ability to access the people that they support and work with, due to limitations on mobility. And this is really, really significant because, of course, in light of lack of access to mainstream services, undocumented women and documented people rely heavily on social, on civil society for support, not only for healthcare and other types of social support, but also just the types of solidarity and support that we kind of just need to keep going in a difficult circumstance. At the same time, some members have seen really increase in demand from people in need of services, and also groups that they're not even, they don't customarily work with. And another thing I just wanted to share is that actually the main issue, the most urgent issues that our members have highlighted in terms of the pandemic and related measures for undocumented people is linked to destitution and loss of income. And so this is something that I thought was just, again, underlaid a lot of what was shared by the other speakers. But of course, the loss of jobs during the pandemic as a result of the pandemic. And of course, paired with this, the absence of any support in terms of income support and protection. And what this has meant in terms of people already on the edge of poverty really falling into extreme situations of destitution. And I also just wanted to share the concerns that some of our members have expressed about the long-term impact. And again, I think we've all heard that, I mean, there's an urgency right now to the situation, but there's also going to be a sustained impact for many people living in situations of marginalizations and poverty, and that includes, of course, undocumented people and migrant women in many instances. And so in just thinking about the future and what this could mean, there are concerns that there will be ongoing and greater needs from these groups. But at the same time, because of increased needs within the broader national populations, the possibility of funds being redirected towards other priorities and less support financially to the organizations working directly with these individuals and communities. So again, in the context of our discussion about funding, I thought that was something to raise, and thinking about the necessity, and in the longer term, the possible greater need of organizations working with undocumented people, undocumented women in particular, for support to be able to bridge to these individuals, often in situations of extreme exclusion. I was going to say a word about some of the policy responses we've seen related to detention, related to residence permits and regularization and so on, but I won't take up any more time on that. I think there have been some promising measures taken, but the challenge, of course, is that they're all being taken in the context of urgency, and we need to see what the opportunity is really to pivot to a longer term and sustainable approach to issues around social protection and inclusion and solidarity for these communities in the longer term. So thanks very much for the opportunity again. I'll leave it there.
Alina, thank you very much for this information. And also, I just want to round up, PICUM is the Platform International Cooperation Undocumented Migrants. So this is, you were also part of one of our webinars that we had last year. So we do have some collaborations. We are opening the room for questions now. We are going to go 5 or maximum 10 minutes over the time. So if there is any question that people want to clarify, we also know you will have the information. The video will be also online soon. So you will have all the information. I see some people were asking for Alexandra's presentation. So we will share all the information. So you can also drop down your email here on the chat, although we already have your emails. But if you want something like you really don't want to be missed, you can drop your email on the chat also. So is there any question that from the attendees you want to ask, to raise, you want to present something in really short words? You have then a raising hand in the bar, that you can just raise your hand and say that you want to talk. And I don't see much more movement, so I don't know if people are not able to raise hand. Alina, please talk, please, you're welcome.
Sorry, it's me again. It's a question that I had popped into the chat box. It's for Julissa. I wanted to understand a bit better the regularization scheme that that is being advocated for in Spain, and who the objective is in terms of who will be covered by the regularization scheme. I understand that there was a significant regularization in Italy, but it mainly was really geared towards certain sectors. But I understand that the one that you're advocating for in Spain really goes beyond kind of a regularization of workers. So can you just say a bit more about who would be covered?
Julissa.
Vale. En primer lugar, gracias por la pregunta, pero, o sea, cuando lo estás comentando es como si diéramos por hecho de que ya se está iniciando este proceso, ¿no? En todo caso, no es así, sino que es un debate y una propuesta política que hacemos los distintos colectivos y organizaciones que estamos en esta iniciativa de regularización ya. Y cuando hemos estado sentándonos con los distintos partidos políticos, ¿no? Y tanteando también qué es lo que está diciendo o qué está pensando el Partido Socialista, quien es el que está gobernando, pues no nos han dado todavía respuestas a eso, si va a ser como sectores o no, ¿no? O sea, que no tenemos aún esa información. Sin embargo, tal y como lo proponemos desde regularización ya, es una regularización no como Italia ni como Portugal, sino una regularización permanente, es decir, no por un X tiempo y además sin condiciones. O sea, no queremos una regularización solamente de los sectores, determinados sectores laborales, como puede ser el sector de la agricultura o el sector de los cuidados, porque creemos que es profundamente utilitarista, ¿no? O sea, sí, unos meses mientras necesitamos vuestra mano de obra, pero luego búsquense la vida. O sea, esa no es nuestra propuesta. Creemos totalmente que es una cuestión de justicia y social y de derechos, y por eso lo pedimos en estos términos, ¿no? Y puede parecer descabellado, ¿no? De cómo piden.
And afterwards you can leave. So in that sense, the regularization is hopefully going to be more inclusive. Now, the last one which took place was in 2018 by the socialists who was still governing Now, when we made our proposal, what we are indicating is we are actually referring to the law on foreigners, the Article 27, which provides a possibility to regulate someone's status, as it says in the article, if there are reasons for public interest or national security. So in that sense, we believe we fall under the already what is stipulated by the law. So it is very, what we're seeking and advocating for is a broad and inclusive regularization. We don't want the regularization for the migrants to be just dedicated or limited to sectors of workers. We don't want an initiative such as this one to be afterwards transformed into something discriminatory and slave-like. We want them to be able to have absolute access to all types of work, to be absolutely equal on the labor market. So we don't want it to be limited to sectors of home care, agriculture, etc. Thank you very much, Lisa. I can see that all of the many of the panelists and participants are writing in the chat. So and some of them are already saying goodbye. So we're going to be wrapping up. So
stand up and keep on shouting really hard that we are here to stay, isn't it? So thank you very much for all the panelists, for all your really wonderful information. Melody, I see your raising hand, but they really have to close down now. People are already leaving, so we have to count on the time of others. You can always send information, send us emails, and we can continue chatting conversation on email basis. Thank you very much. And all attendees, I hope you had a really nice time. You learned a lot, and we hope to keep in touch for the coming webinars.